Hello, friends. We will all discover shortly whether or not I am actually broadcasting at the moment. Music disappeared for some reason. I don't need music. Any indication? Okay, I think we are broadcasting. There we go. We'll forego the music because I don't want to waste your time. All right, I want this to be a short, intense, important daily art adventure, 523. Okay, I've called it, this very unusual title, I've called it Subservient, the Power of Subservient Values. What a weird title. I hope to make sense of that before we finish this brief broadcast. First of all, a broad general statement. First of all, about myself. The single most common mistake I still make in my paintings, that's a strong statement, isn't it? Is I do something in my painting. Let's pretend for a moment I'm painting from a photograph like this, okay? Here's the single biggest mistake. I do something in my painting. Why? Because it's in the photograph. The single biggest mistake I make. Now let's put it in a plein air context. The single biggest mistake I make in my plein air painting is I do something obediently, if you will, in my painting because in plein air, I look over there and that's the way it is. You get it? That's the single greatest mistake I continue to make, even though I have been beating myself about that for at least 2 years. And it's only because before that I didn't know enough to beat myself. So even after 2 years of consistent beating, that's still the number one mistake I make. And by the way, don't tell anybody I said so. But that is one of the biggest mistakes that everybody makes. Okay, maybe not everybody, but almost everybody. Everybody I know. So, you do not want to copy the photograph. I mean, we all know that. I mean, that is so simple. That's so elementary. It's like we shouldn't even need to say that. But I do. So I want to point you to one of the best ways to do that. And that is by keeping in mind the power of subservient values. I know that's a weird word, and the word subservient is not one that we all use in common everyday parlance. You don't use the word parlance either, I know. Anyway, what do I mean by well, let's just start here. That means I'll use this sketch that I just started at the end of my last broadcast. I did it in just a very few minutes, right? What that means is if you are working in the dark zone of your painting, everything that happens inside this dark zone should be subservient to the darkness of this zone. And I'm going to say a similar thing again. Let's talk about the midtones. Everything that happens in this midtone zone should be subservient to the midtone zone. I'll make this, and of course, the light zones, which in this painting, in this composition, the lights are scattered. Everything that happens, repeat after me, right? You can say it now with me. Everything that happens in the light zones should be subservient. That is, submit to, come under, be modified in order to fit in the light zones. Okay, now I want to put the two big statements together that I just made. Number one mistake I make, and I'm trying real hard to get out of it, and the number one mistake most people make, I'm just going to speak bluntly, this is not a scientific evaluation, but it's my impression. My impression is that I'm not the only one who does this. We all do this. Number one mistake, we do something in our painting because that's the way it is in the photograph. But one of the main ways we can overcome this tendency to mistake, this erroneous tendency, one of the main ways we can overcome this is, again, to keep in mind the importance, the power of subservient tones. Okay, now I'm going to pull up two great examples of this. One is a living today painter, teacher. I don't know him, but a good friend of mine has taken from him very much. Okay, so I derived secondary benefit from, his name is Phil Stark, and I have derived much benefit from Phil Stark's teaching because my friend David Foster studied with Phil, and I get with David and so on and so forth. Got it? And so he's one guy I'm going to talk about. The other person that does this well, the other person I'm going to talk about is John F. Carlson, a deceased old master, mid-20th century, same, you hear me talk, perhaps you've heard me talk often about, now his name went, father of California Plein Air School of Painting. It'll come back to me in a second. Sorry, you just slipped out of my mind. Anyway, contemporary of his, mid-20th century. Okay, let's talk about what these guys do and why they're so good about it. And I'm going to need, again, another piece of scrap paper, looking over here in my wastebasket, because I throw out enough paper around here that I shouldn't have to, well, I am going to grab a new piece. Okay, here we go. Both of these gentlemen are big proponents in landscape painting. And if you haven't heard this before, you should hear it now. Okay, the four planes, P-L-A-N-E-S, the four planes of the landscape. Okay? This is, I learned it from David Foster, who learned it from Phil Stark, who, as I understand it, learned it from John F. Carlson, the old dead master. Okay? And here is what the four planes of landscape are. Here's my landscape. There's the landscape of, there's the plane of the sky. So this is us looking up. I'm just putting it in perspective so that you can see it. We're looking up at the sky. That's plane number one. Plane number two is the plane of the ground. Do you understand? I'm using the word plane as in geometry class. The sky is over us. The ground is underneath us. And then in landscapes, there's the plane, the inclined plane, the slanted plane. Things in your landscape that are slanted, most typically the sides of hills or mountains. And then number four, the vertical planes. So here we go. They are things that stick straight up, like trees. You with me? Okay, so the four planes of the landscape are sky, ground, slanted, and vertical. Now, the most common arrangement of values on these planes, I'm going to paint this for you real quickly, is number one, the lightest plane is usually the sky. The second lightest plane, usually, traditionally, typically, is the ground, because it's getting a lot of light directly from the sky. Does that make sense? The third lightest, or in this case, second to darkest plane, whichever way you want to go, is the inclined plane. The sides of hills, the sides of rocks, the sides of mountains, and so forth. And then finally, the darkest plane, and I've run out of black gouache, so hang on just a second here. Is this black? Yep, yep. So finally, the darkest plane typically, now both, Phil Stark would be quick to say, no, wait, this is only, you know, like in a Bob Ross kindergarten level of painting, many times it doesn't work out this way. Sometimes the sky is not the lightest, sometimes, and so on and so forth. But I'm just going to, there we go. So those are the 4 standard, typical, most typical, like in a Bob Ross painting. Those are the 4 planes. Okay, number 1, and they don't have to be numbered in this order, but this is the most typical. The lightest is the sky. The second lightest is the flat ground. The third lightest, or the second darkest, is the slanted plane. And number 4, the darkest is the uprights. Now, of course, if you have a cliff, anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. As far as this typical, here is what Phil Stark, and he learned it from John Carlson, so I'm assuming John Carlson also said the same thing. It is important when you're operating then, let me go ahead and get a small brush out, and let's do some details here. It's important then when you're working in any one of these planes, that the secondary shapes inside these major planes need to be submitted to, secondary to the planes that they're in. In other words, you're going to have dark areas in this ground plane. Let's say we've got a river and the banks of a river or a road. Okay, so there are dark areas. But the dark areas in this plane are not as dark as the dark areas in the vertical plane. Here represented by just a few dark marks, trunks of trees and so forth. Whatever it is, it's dark. So this is, in here number 2, this is dark, but it's not as dark as this. Why? Because you have to take it in context. In other words, this is a relative statement. What is dark here in number 2 is relative to number 2. Let me give another example. There are going to be light areas in this plane number 2. So here I'm doing, let's make, now it's a river for sure, or maybe a lake even. No, it's maybe a lake in the distance, but there, the body of water. Okay, so it's light, but it's not as light as the light areas in the lightest plane. Now I can't make this any lighter right now because it's pure white, but if that was okay, hang on, I'll do it real quick. Let's make it a slightly better painting now. Instead of pure white, can you see that now? That's not pure white anymore. And yes, we can put, hang on, I need to put up, there we go, there's some white gouache right directly on the paper. Okay, the light areas in plane number 1 are much brighter and lighter than the light areas in plane number 2. These values, all the values in this major area are subservient, secondary. They serve this major area. Are you getting this? Okay, and I'm going to go back to my, and then again, here's a mountain. It's the second darkest. So there are light areas in these mountains, but the light areas here are darker than the light areas here. The dark areas in this inclined plane are darker than the dark areas in the horizontal plane. Is that making sense? You can find, by the way, I did a real quick search online, just Googled 4 planes of, I think I did painting, 4 planes landscape. I think those are the 4 words that I did. Painting, 4 planes landscape. And I found several. There's no shortage of teaching on this subject. And again, one of the contemporary heroes of this kind of thinking is Phil Stark, and one of the classic heroes of this thinking is John F. Carlson. Okay, you ready? Whew, so take a breath. By the way, we could spend, I thought about, as you can see, I did a screenshot because I'll use these in my teaching in the future, not just for this broadcast right here, but I'll use this kind of thing in the future. And then I printed it also on the back in black and white, so it's real easy to see this principle I'm talking about. And again, they're pretty small, I know, so I don't know how well you can see this. But for instance, can you see this painting right here? Let me get it at least in the middle of your screen. There we go. In this one, because there's snow on the ground, the lightest plane is the ground, the floor. Second is the sky. Third is a vertical. And there's virtually no inclined plane in this one. It's just 3 values. And all the values in this plane serve the lightness of this plane. All the variations in the second plane, there's a little bit of light, a little bit of dark, but it doesn't violate the feeling that the sky is the second lightest thing. And then in the trees here, there's lights and darks and lights and darks and lights and darks. But all those lights and darks don't overrule the feeling of darkness of that plane. Okay? Now, I want to get just one step more practical. By the way, I have a little bit of denatured alcohol on this tissue right here that lets me wipe that off so that it's cleaned, ready for the next time I want to use these. Okay, put those in my filing cabinet for future teaching. There we go. Now, here's why I got all excited about this. I was having an aha moment a little while ago while I was doing this sketch, and if you want to watch me do this, I started it in Daily Art Adventure number 522, the one right before this one. Okay? As I was doing this, as I said, I had a light bulb came on. I love it when light bulbs come on. and I'm going to switch. I'm going to mark now on this one. This is my brownish no-tan. Okay? I talked about why I'm doing it in brown. I talked about that in Daily Art Adventure number 522 that I just did a few minutes ago. I also have a no-tan photograph that I used to do this. Okay, here's a light bulb that came on. You can clearly see the dark zone in this composition. You can clearly see the midtones in this composition, and you can clearly see the lights, right? Now, once again, here's my photograph, or here's my photograph in black and white. If I'm foolish, which I am often, in spite of what Izzy says, if I don't have my wits about me, I will look at the photograph. For instance, let's zoom in on one very particular detail right here. You see these? This is like fake balconies. Faux balconies with you can't see it probably, but with little wrought iron, like French, empire architecture, I would imagine is what this is called. But these white fake balconies, they are very, very light. They're painted white, and there's a decent amount of light hitting them, so they're very, very light. If I am not thinking carefully, I will just merrily stick my brush over here into the white gouache, because I'm copying what's in the photograph. Are you listening to me? And I will happily copy those little fake balconies. And shouldn't have done that. Why? Because this is in my dark zone. Now that doesn't mean I can't do some light stuff in my dark zone, but that shouldn't be my first impulse. Why did I do this white? Well, right now I did it to do as a demonstration for you guys, but why would I normally accidentally do that white? Because that's the way it is in the photograph. Let me suggest that if we understand the concept of subservient values, that is, anything that I do in the dark zone should be secondary, subservient to the dark zone. Therefore, how much more effective would it be if instead of dipping my brush over here in some white gouache, how about if I dip my brush in some mid-tone gouache. And then come back over here and paint those little fake balconies in medium, in a gray, in this case a brownish gray. All right, so you can hardly see that, but I think you got the idea from my verbiage what I'm doing. Now, instead of these being like boing, electric, blistering white, now they're mid-tone, they're gray. But you know what's funny? They still stand out enough to look like fake balconies. They you know, they'll still, when I do the details, they're still going to look like this, but now they're not violating the dark zone. So, in a word, ready? And this, I'll end with this. When you're working in your dark zone, all of your lights should be darker. That means you can't have little speckles of white. You can. But generally speaking, and when you're working in your light zone, all of your, I just switch now. You're working in your light zone, all of your darks should be lighter, right? Because you're in your light zone. So you, instead of coming in here with a big old black, fat, honking, dark stroke, no, you do pale gray, and it still looks like a tree sticking up in the sky. But I'm not violating my light zone. And of course, and you got it now, don't you? And here in the mid-tone, instead of going all black, you know, all the way dark or all the way light, I tend to make my subservient, my secondary marks, slightly dark or slightly light. Does that make sense? Man, that, and again, I just, as I was painting, that light bulb came on. I went, you know what? That is, I feel like that's a good way to describe what, I tossed their pictures over there. That's a good way to describe what Phil Stark is teaching, what David F. Carlson taught about the planes of the landscape. And by the way, their principles apply to still lifes and every kind of thing. It's not just landscape. But I've given you here an illustration that the details in here, generally speaking, should be darker. The details in the light area generally should be lighter. In other words, a dark mark in the light area is much lighter than a dark mark in the dark area. Are you following that? You might have to rewind that and listen to it a couple times. Get it? You've got dark stuff in your light zone, but it's not nearly as dark as the dark stuff in your dark zone. Does that make sense? And vice versa, of course. There we go. I don't know if I'm going to stick with that term, the power of subservient values, but I like the way that sounds. And I hope I can remember it. I do have a comment. Hey, guy. Heitor Kovaleski. Thank you for your confirmation. And then Cindy's said, I've been an artist for years and never thought about that. Is what I was doing. Thank you so much. You're very welcome. I appreciate that. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. I don't have a ton of viewers, but I'm looking for more just because I enjoy teaching. I shared this with some of you a couple of weeks ago. I was at a Christmas party a month ago and something came flying out of my mouth that, you know, the way things do. I'd never thought of it before. When I said, wow, that really makes sense. And I'm just explain for a minute, why do I do all these broadcasts? I said to my friend, well, if you put me in a room painting, my joy meter is pretty high, you know, it's up to here. I'm pretty happy in a room painting. But if you put me in a room painting with a camera on me, my joy meter is boing, boing, boing. So for some reason, I just love doing this. For some reason, I'm a teacher, I think, and I enjoy teaching. I don't think it's an ego thing. I think it's just the way I'm wired. It's the way I'm put together. I paint better when you guys are watching me. So thank you for watching me. Okay, that's all for today. Say hi, Lake. Say bye, Lake and Izzy.